Hi, I have a playlist in ethics, and I've only recently added a few videos in it that are virtue ethics. Um, the first one started in Aristotle, and that introduced a couple of basic concepts that virtue ethics, even into contemporary virtue ethics, has. Um, it was ignored for a very long time, and it has been only until relatively recently that there's actual virtue theory, whether it be in uh, ethics or epistemology, even. So, anyway, in my ethics playlist, I've been using this book. It has various topics in ethics in it, and I've been using this one as well. Oxford Handbook of Ethical Theory, edited by David Copp. And I have two other books that I use for that too. But this book here, the Oxford book, it has a group of articles starting the first set. There's two sets of them. First set is on meta-ethics, and the second set is normative ethics. And today I want to talk about one of the articles in, well, I'm not talking about the article itself, but I'm talking about virtue ethics the way Julianus sees it. Like in the normative ethical theory part, it has stuff from consequentialism, deontology, Kantian ethics, ethics of care, anti-theories, stuff like that. And Anus is a prominent philosopher, prominent Aristotelian philosopher, and she has a article in here, and pretty much every article in here is built to discuss a certain thing within a certain, to like sort of explain a certain thing, not really to prove a real point exactly, but to explain something. And pretty much what I want to do here is, I've read through this selection by Honest quite a few times, but if you have this book, definitely read that. It gives you what Honest's article in here gives you. It gives you pretty much an outline of what classical virtue ethics is, and pretty much it gives you a nice outline. And if you combine that with writings of other people on virtue ethics, then it gives you a very good idea of what virtue ethics is. Myself, I thought it a good idea to use what Honest does in that article to make a diagram, basically, of the what and how of virtue ethics. And she states in her article that the idea, she basically goes from the idea of virtues, and she discusses the disposition and character, the state who act habitually for reasons, and then she discusses the intellectual reasons for acting rightly, or in the terms of virtue ethics, the reasons for doing what is right, doing what is virtuous. But I think she says in that article that it is a different task to figure out the emotional or the effective reasons for acting virtuously or acting rightly. Virtue ethicists still call the good and the right acting rightly, because it's acting based upon virtues. Now, virtues mean, essentially generosity, honesty, courage, stuff like that. That's those basic words that we all hear talk about on a daily basis. Those are all in themselves virtues, but the virtues themselves are not what is to be discussed here. Pretty much where I want to start is the idea of a virtue. Here I want to go through the whole diagram. This is pretty much what my diagram looks like. That's Pretty much, that is what I want to go through today. Virtues. Virtues equals the state of a person among many actual virtues. A certain, pretty much like a virtuous person, this person that has a certain disposition or character, or I guess in here I'm not only using what Honest is saying, but I'm using also the terminology and theory of someone named Verna Marks, because he wrote a book called Towards Phenomenological Ethics, where he disposes of ethics that are metaphysical, pretty much. I mean, he, like many ethicists do that, but he not only does that, but he gives effective reasons for acting rightly, regardless of whatever normative theory you have. But he himself is more disposed to be a virtue ethicist, in my opinion, through his terminology and what he says. I have like a few videos on this. They would be in. I'm not sure if they'd be in the ethics list or the phenomenology one, but definitely they're definitely in the phenomenology playlist. I know that. But essentially, what we're talking about here is disposition, character, and in the words of Verna Marks, attunement. That's not his word, but it's a word that he uses quite a bit. Pretty much, what kind of this is we're talking about a disposition as an state to act habitually, but for reasons. Now we're not talking about a habit like smoking or chewing sunflower seeds or toothpicks, or even like just random things that are mindless. We're talking about things that we do for reasons. We start to do things because of reasons that then become habits because of doing them. Virtue ethicists as well as Honest refer to this as a buildup, because of someone doing things that are right and practicing certain virtues based upon practical reasoning, as well as, in my opinion, as well as for effective reasons as well. But pretty much, there's a why of why are we in this disposition, this character, this attunement, this state to act habitually, but for reasons. There's two columns here. As for why, these two columns here are why, or how, why a person comes to this state, this disposition, the character. This is the why. Honest and classical virtue ethics does not hold the effective column that I have here. This effective column that I have written in this diagram comes from Verna Marks's book Towards Phenomenological Ethics, and I think that along with Edmund Husserl's fifth meditation of the Cartesian meditations, that is where he discusses a intermonadic community where empathy is in action. Now, that is a very different concept, but I believe Verna Marx's concept paired with Husserl's concepts in the fifth meditation, I could get way more into those two things by themselves, Marx and Husserl, and that I think that itself could make a certain, in my opinion, there could be a formula for a virtue ethics that is classical virtue ethics, but combined with Verna Marks and Edmund Husserl. And I'm mostly saying Edmund. Edmund Husserl in the fifth meditation discusses things like empathy, and in that part there itself, there isn't really a virtue ethics there. But those concepts are the building blocks of a certain effective aspect of virtue ethics, in my opinion. And then pairing that part of Husserl's philosophy with Verna Marks. Now, if you've read Verna Marks, you would see how this would come together. And I might make a video later about this formula with Marx, Husserl, and virtue ethics, the classical virtue ethics, combined with Marx and Husserl. I could have a whole other video on how this would work together. But for now, I just want to discuss these two things: the intellectual reasons, which is the understanding, the intellect, as well as the effective reasons. I'm going to start with the intellectual reasons, or the understanding of the right thing to do. Classical virtue ethics states that there is intellectual reasons of doing the right thing, practicing virtues. This starts with practical reasoning, the understanding of the state of affairs, and in understanding of the appropriate actions to follow. So we're talking about a certain. So let's say we were practicing certain virtues, have a set of virtues that we're practicing. And this comes from practical reasoning. Practical reasoning, the word practical means essentially normative. Not exactly, but they call it normative ethics because, like, those theories, the deontological, the consequential, and the virtue ethical theories are about what to do, what should be done in a certain case based on rules or concepts. Consequentialism and deontology are by rules, and it is debated that virtue ethics is also by rules, but in my opinion, it's not. It's by certain virtues that are put into practice, by practical reasoning, and by doing things given those virtues because of certain state of affairs being seen, practical reasoning being put into use, and certain virtues being used to give a response to a certain state of affairs. So, if one continues to do this, continues to put virtues grounded in practical reasoning to use, what will happen is, according to virtue ethicists, classical ones, what will happen is the person will become skilled and will habitually do these things. Again, not habitually in a mindless way, like smoking or chewing a toothpick or chewing your fingernails, but have this buildup of habitual and skilled action based grounded in practical reasoning, and that itself is the how and what of how someone understands what the right thing to do is, and having done so. The effective column here, I'm not really discussing Husserl here right now. This is all from Marx, Verna Marks, not Karl Marx. Effective reasons. Honest decides not to discuss this part, but I want to because it comes from Marx, and that is one of my things that I feel is most important in a certain ethical theory. First, we have in Marx's book towards phenomenological ethics, he says, recognizing immortality and vulnerability of yourself and others shows a commonality between yourself and others, and thus grows the Husserlian kind of empathy that he discusses in the fifth meditation. Like, in a certain, using Husserlian terms, in an intermediate community, I understand that I see from some kind of inkling of reasoning that I am mortal, I'm very vulnerable, and I could easily be killed or whatever. I'm easily vulnerable and I'm mortal. And I see Well, first I see that in someone else, and I see how I myself am common to them, and I see how we both have that same thing. We both have that vulnerability and that mortality, and that finds between me and that person a commonality, and that is what, according to Marx, leads to a certain compassion or attunement, and even empathy. The recognizing of mortality and vulnerability of yourself and others, and thus a commonality, is what first starts this. And that leads to compassion/empathy. And that is the effective emotional reasons of how you come to do something that is virtuous. Because I think both of these things pair together, the practical reasoning and the skilled habitual build-up of virtuous action, plus the emotional part, leads to an action. Actually, leads to, that those are the two things that cause. I'm sorry, my iPad just flickered on, and my screensaver is funny. It's my cat. Anyway, I lost my train of thought. Okay. Okay, these two things here make up how someone comes to a certain disposition or character. Because in my opinion, people see a certain thing happening. They see these certain affairs and they understand the reasons of why they should be doing something. But there's no reason why they will, though. People don't, in this world anyway, people don't act based on understanding something that they should do. They act based upon their emotions. Doesn't matter what kind of ethical theory you have, people act on their emotions. That's just the way it is. Here, anyway, in this time, people act on their emotions, and they're not going to act based on intellectual reasons. They're going to act if they come to a certain emotional state as well, and not only on intellectual state of understanding, but an affective and emotional state of understanding of who the person is or what's going on there as well. And those two things paired together is what will create that state of habitual, meaningful action and leads to a certain disposition or character. And all this happens through various kinds of virtues being used in a certain state. Various virtues used. And that's what leads to this disposition or character. That up to here, all this through everything I've discussed here is the how of the virtuous life. This is how it comes to be. Now it never stops, but this is how one comes to what I'm about to talk about now. What I want to talk about now is the state of living life virtuously. This is it's kind of a circle because there's no, like in this previous one there was just one arrow which leads to virtue. In here it goes round, round, round. It doesn't really stop anywhere. First of all, there's virtues, of course, that people put into use and they use. And then there's two things that are put into consideration as everything that I just discussed before here is used and put into practice and leads to, this disposition or character, or disposition and attunement to act based upon virtues. What is considered here in a person who has this disposition or character is your life as a whole, because it's most likely that if you are considering your life, if you are considering your ethical theory, how you should be acting, it's likely that you already have a social position, a life of some sort. So what is considered here in this disposition to act, or attunement to act, or character among virtues, is your life as a whole. What your life is, and that becomes very important for someone who has come so far to be in a certain disposition or character or attunement to act, a disposition to act among all these virtues that are built up, and then you are skilled and habitual in those. Your life as a whole is going to be, you will consider your life as a whole. Also, among that, you will consider an aspiration to be better, as a virtuous person, as you do have your social position in your life already, and you're considering your life as a whole. A big issue is that you're wanting to consider your life as a whole as to how you can be better from the way you are now, and that is what is after this. And then, what is essentially among all of this, what the virtuous life is, it's called eudaimonia, or that's what it is in Greek. Eudaimonia, it's dully can be translated to happiness, but happiness is not a good word here, because it's often looked at as the consequential idea of happiness, where it's based on pleasures or desires. So that is not what is being stated here. The best translation for eudaimonia has been flourishing, because it's a virtuous life where everything is doing very, very well among everything that you are doing in your virtuous life, and everything, and it's mostly like a really great, I'm trying not to describe this in consequential terms, because most words that describe being happy or feeling good are consequentialist, and even utilitarian. So flourishing, essentially doing great in this life where you have this continuing to grow disposition to act among all these virtues. You're trying to improve yourself all the time. And it is, given all these things that I said before, and not in a sense of a consequentialist, it is a sort of really doing well and being somewhat happy, and happy in this sense, not in really any other sense. So that, in my opinion, is the whole diagram of the how and what of virtue ethics. Not only from Julianus, that's the basic frame of classical virtue ethics. That's what she discusses in this handbook, but also the effective branch here of how one comes to this point comes from Marx, mostly Marx, and yeah. Is there any? Does any of you have any problems with this? Is there any kind of? Do you think that this is? You think that this is worse than consequentialism or deontology, or do you think that this is just a formula that has rules in it, just like anything else? If you have any ideas, please post a comment somewhere. I always read comments, always. So thank you.